Great. So, yeah, we specialize in custom formulation, medical device manufacturing, and compounds, mostly for the minimally invasive surgical, which is catheters. We started doing polymer distribution in 2005. We kind of, backward integrated into the distribution business, mainly because a lot of the polymers were very difficult to get your hands on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, the supply chain of some of these polymers. And we had been working with pharmaceutical ingredients really for about 20 years now, but in earnest since about 2006. And we do have customers, a lot of the North American states, South American countries, and probably over 33 countries around the world, many in Europe, and up to 145 employees now, over 4 facilities. So on the right-hand side, you can see the facilities. 3 of those are in Putnam. One is our pharmaceutical building, which has all the GMP clean rooms and so forth. The newer building, which is our higher volume production manufacturing facility, and also houses distribution warehousing and so forth. We have our R&D center in Putnam, Connecticut, and then also out in Las Vegas, Nevada. We have R&D, we have implant manufacturing, and we have custom formulation and compounding. So we pretty much, well, I always say we're very poorly diversified in the industry. However, we do a lot of things within the medical device industry. So there's probably not an application we don't get involved with. And again, mostly everything goes inside the body or onside the body or on the body, either temporarily for just a few minutes, or it may be what they call permanent, which could be over 30 days, or could be something bioresorbable or something that's in your body for however long it needs to be in there, hopefully the rest of your life, without any complications. So we like to start early on with engineers on just talking about the application, get as much information so that some of these issues don't crop up later on in the program. But we'll start with formulation, either your formulation or something that we work on together, or one of our formulations, feasibility studies, process. We do validations and so forth. We have a full team to provide the regulatory support. I know, especially in Europe, some of the regulatory environment is changing, and we're supporting that. It appears transparency of ingredients, formulations, processing methods, and so forth is very critical. So we tend to share quite a bit of information, as much as we possibly can. And again, we're looking at no change of formulation agreements and that sort of thing. And we've been ISO 13485 almost, since it's come out. This is already the second revision of the 2016 standard, which seems like it was just yesterday, but it's already a couple of years going. So how do we connect with MedNet and our partnership? Well, we've been with MedNet since 2005, and they've done a fantastic job for us, and they provide all of our customer support, business development support, communication management in Europe. And that's the mainland. That's also the islands as well. So just a terrific job. We enjoy working with MedNet, and we'll probably be doing this for a long time. They handle the trade shows for us. I know those are on the back burner at the present moment, but we're looking forward to seeing everybody hopefully very soon. So now we're getting into the presentation a little bit, talk about minimally invasive catheter polymers. And these are all the common materials that you probably already use, and they've been around for a long time. Pretty much all of these started off as industrial polymers, and many of them still produced the same way that they have been produced 20, 30, 50 years ago. but polyurethanes, and there's a lot of different customizations and advantages and advances that were made in polyurethanes over the years, the aliphatic and some of the more long-term implantable grades that are available. And what's happened over the years is a lot of these manufacturers, the ones that are a little bit more dedicated to supporting the medical device, they've improved the stewardship of their products and the cleanliness, lower gels, and just the manufacturing of the medical products so that they're a little bit higher quality, a little bit more controlled quality. We still do a lot of lot selection because the specifications on most of these polymers are fairly broad, and as we know, when you're trying to extrude something extremely small, you need really tight tolerances. So these are the primary polymers, polyamide elastomers. You probably recognize the trade names as PBACs and so forth. The nylons 11s and 12s. Really don't see too many nylon 6,6 or any of the nylons that absorb a lot of moisture. It's usually the 11s and 12s, which is extremely low moisture absorption, and that's what helps them hold their size during extrusion and performance. Polyketones, PVC, polyolefins, fluoropolymers, and its whole family of fluoropolymers from PTFE, the extrudable fluoropolymers, FEP, and the Kynars, the PVDFs. Getting into the catheter trends, and some of you folks may be brand new to the industry, so you're seeing things as they are today. If you go back 5 years ago, 10 years, and certainly 20 and 30 years ago, things were quite a bit different. And one of the probably noticeable differences is the size of the catheter and the uses of the catheters, what they're used for all kinds of applications today. And these devices are tending to get sometimes longer because they're trying to reach deeper into the body. It might be a neurovascular catheter, so this could be something long and very tiny. So you're always going to see even the catheters from 15, 20 years ago, today's catheters are about a third of the size. And the reason being is you want to have a procedure with the patient that is as minimally invasive as possible, less trauma, and quicker, so the doctors could get you in and out. And a faster procedure means there's going to be less complications. So that's always the trend, and that's where everybody is moving to make everything as small and as easy on the patient as possible. So what that means, there's less material to work with, so it means the material needs to be about as good as possible. So the things we're concerned with, and a lot of the device requirements, especially if it's going inside the body, is the visibility. And we'll talk a little bit more about radiopacity. As we know, polymers do not show up on X-ray, and fluoroscopy is used to detect these things when they're in the body. So we need to put in a radiopaque filler. Coefficient of friction, depending on what it is, if it's a sheath, if it's an introducer, whatever it might be, you need to have patient ease. So friction is always a concern. You might have a wire that's sliding inside the tube. You don't want it to stick. Pushability to desired location. As you could imagine, these catheters get smaller and smaller, tinier, and they might have a tendency to kink. They don't have a lot of stiffness to them, so they tend to crunch up. So you need to manage the flexural modulus and the strength without kinking these things. Infection control, certainly today with COVID, that's more on everybody's mind, but the antimicrobial technology and identification, whether it be as easy as coloring it, or if you need to do something a little bit more, and we'll talk about that. So when we're starting a project, it's very critical to know what the application is, and even as getting an understanding how long is it going to be inside the body, because that would tell you what kind of material you can use. A lot of suppliers, a lot of suppliers, they don't want their polymer to go in the body at all. Other suppliers, it's a 7 day, some are 14 days, some are 30 days. There's only a handful of materials that you can really keep in the body over 30 days. Not that they wouldn't work over 30 days, just the supplier is not comfortable. So we need to know all that up front. The catheter system requirements, what is it going to be doing? Is there any physical properties, chemical properties that we need to be concerned with? Bonding. Usually these are things you don't think of until after the fact, and we might be working with a lubricated formulation and we find out later, well, we're having some trouble bonding to this, so we have to retool the formulation. Performance size limitation, how well is it going to extrude? You could have a great polymer, high molecular weight, but then you can't get it through the die because it doesn't flow. So those are all things to be to consider, and if you consider them ahead of time, less problems you have during the development, and of course the regulatory support. First, I want to talk about visibility in the body, and these are radiopaque compounds, and I mentioned already, why do you need it? Why do you need to put a radiopaque additive in there? Well, most polymers, they don't show up on X-ray, and the thinner the wall of the tubing, the deeper it goes in the body, the harder it is to see even with a radiopaque filler. So this is the list of radiopaque fillers, and these ingredients have been around for decades, and they're very safe. They've been used. They have a really good track record. Certainly the workhorse is the barium sulfate, the least expensive, and you can get very high loadings. However, it is the lowest density, and it is the lower performance of the radiopaque fillers. But it has excellent heat stability, which means it's compatible with almost all of the polymers, and it has very low reactivity, again, meaning that it is compatible with most of the polymers, even polyurethane, which tends to be a little more sensitive to things like bismuth subcarbonate and some of the higher metal content radiopaque fillers. So bismuth subcarbonate is probably next on the list, and very common radiopaque filler, more density than barium sulfate. You see this a lot in cardiovascular and neurovascular, mainly because these are thinner wall catheters, and you can get fairly high loadings because of the density of the bismuth. It's compatible with some of the polyurethanes, the aliphatics, not all the polyurethanes, compatible with nylons, polyethylenes, PBACs, so it's used very commonly. Bismuth trioxide, you see this in more of the older legacy formulations. You would see this more in the fluoropolymers. And the reason being, bismuth trioxide, even though the density, specific gravity, is similar to any of the bismuths, the bulk density is very heavy, meaning when you're trying to manufacture a product, putting 30, 40, even 60% by weight of bismuth into a polymer, you have to feed all this powder into an extruder. So having a high bulk density helps feed the bismuth trioxide. Disadvantage is the color. It starts off yellow, and in most polymers, it starts to turn brown. Maybe that color, and it's also hard to add pigments when you have bismuth trioxide. You'll see this used in a lot of fluoropolymers, because fluoropolymers tend to be very high density polymers, and it's hard to get 20, 30, 40% by weight of anything into a fluoropolymer. So bismuth trioxide is one of the few. Bismuth oxychloride, I kind of like bismuth oxychloride because it gives you a little bit higher temperature stability. Also, bismuth oxychloride, because of its shape, almost a platelet shape, gives you a little different surface finish. So if you're looking for a glossy, smooth surface finish, I mean, you'll see bismuth oxychloride used in a lot of cosmetics, lipsticks and that sort of thing, because it's a shiny, smooth look. So you might use bismuth carbonate in something where you want to get almost that shiny metallic look on the surface. And then, certainly the heavyweight champ is the tungsten, very high density. Downside is, you can get black or gray as the color. Very difficult to put a pigment in it because it is a steely gray powder to start off with. It's you can get very high loadings because it has a high specific gravity. You tend to see this in a tip of a catheter, where you want to really light up the tip of the catheter. Because tungsten tends to degrade a lot of the performance of many of the polymers, especially in high loadings, you might want to limit it to a smaller portion of the catheter. We don't see too many catheters, the entire catheter, that's made with a tungsten compound. Which changed in the years, the decades of all of these radiopaque fillers? Particle size control. Some of these things are jet milled, so you can get them down to finer particle size, a little bit higher performance. Not that smaller is better, but in some instances you do want smaller particle size. But also the particle size distribution, the quality control on these ingredients has gotten better over time, and also the dispersion. So the quality has gotten better, but the chemistry has been the same for decades. So the product line that uses some of the higher performance fillers, we call it Low Pro. We've had that trade name for quite a while now. And these tend to be compounds that are used in neurovascular catheters and cardiovascular catheters. We have another product called Low Pro Clear, and it's with a radiopaque filler that matches the refractive index of the polymer that it goes in. We're very limited to the polymers because there's only so many polymers that do match the refractive index. So that's how you get it optically transparent. It's not crystal clear, but you can see through it, and sometimes in a catheter application you do want to see the optical translucence. There are formulations in polyurethanes. The radiopacity is not strong. It's similar to barium sulfate, and I would say it's similar to like a barium sulfate with 20% loading. But we do have a lot of customers that call that out. And then of course almost everything we do is customized, so we can reinforce a radiopaque compound. We can add lubricants, pigments, and so forth. We are limited on colors once you put radiopaque fillers in the product. Barium gives you the widest range of colors, but we can't color it. Other visibility technologies, and really it's been the last decade, 5 years more precisely, that customers are asking for ultrasound. Echogenicity is the word, and this is the ability to bounce an echo or return a signal during ultrasound examinations. You wouldn't see this in a cardiovascular procedure. However, if you're going into the doctor's office, they might have an ultrasound machine, and if they're trying to locate or put a catheter in for any kind of drug delivery or whatever, they may use an ultrasound. You'll see this a lot of prenatal and that sort of thing. So you might see it in an OBGYN office. So we've got a lot of customers that ask us. We do have plenty of formulations. I'm not going to say we dial them in directly right now because we're still learning a lot about it, and some formulations are better than others. Ultrasound, as you can imagine, it's different for every application. So these definitely be customized formulations. MRI, again, we don't see a lot of applications for MRI because, of course, you put a metal in something and you can't have that with magnetic imaging. So things like barium sulfate will show up, and a couple of other radiopaque fillers and other fillers do show up. We are seeing those applications. We do have some formulations. It's not as tried and true as the fluoroscopy. Going to talk a little bit about surface enhancement and low friction compounds. Most catheters are coated, and it's usually a hydrophilic coating. However, there's a lot of other applications where you need the polymer itself, where something could be compounded into the polymer that could reduce the coefficient of friction. And usually it is the dry coefficient of friction that we're talking about. Maybe there's going to be a wire that's going to go inside of a tube. Maybe there's two things that are going to be sliding on top of one another. So the coefficient of friction of the material is important. And as we're going to see, polymers themselves have different coefficient of frictions. You get a soft elastomer, tends to be very sticky. So those are the ones that need the most help with lubricants. Some of the nylons, some of the polyketones, some of polyolefins, they have reasonable surface lubricity to start off with, but adding additional lubricants can help them out as well. So Propel is a trade name that we use for some of the low friction technology, and we're just trying to improve patient comfort. The formulations that we have, and this is a whole family of formulations, we're trying to retain as much of the mechanical properties as we possibly can. As we mentioned, once you start putting in lubricants, especially if it's a migratory lubricant, which works by coming to the surface, you might have some issues with bonding or printing on the catheter. So we need to know that ahead of time so we can use different types of lubricants. Of course, all these formulations, many of them, more of the regular formulations are standard. I hate to say standard because nothing we have is really standard, but they're all USP Class 6 tested, and all of the custom formulations we're using approved ingredients. And once you have a list of ingredients that have been tried and true over the years, you get a lot of confidence to know that they're going to work. Another one that's really popular, and again, anything that's optically transparent or translucent, we have a lot of customers that are interested in that. A lot of lubricants that we put into the polymer make them opaque so you can't see through them, but we do have many formulations, and this whole product line is based around formulations that are translucent. And depending on which polymer, we get the same results. Some polymers you might even see Propel T, standing for translucent, works even a little bit better. Again, USP Class 6, and we're going to see from some of the data, you can lower the coefficient of friction of a very sticky polymer, which are the low durometer PBACs, low durometer polyurethanes, Pellethane trade name, quite significantly. You'll see that even some of the stiffer polymers like a nylon 11, nylon 12, which is reasonably lubricious, you can improve the lubricity of that. Adding some of these lubricants can also aid in the extrusion process and help out with manufacturability as well. Mechanical properties. Let's talk a little bit about rigidity, because that is one of the main properties, and also burst strength. As the catheters get smaller, the pressures going through these catheters are getting extremely high, so we're limited on the mechanical properties of the polymers. Certainly polyketones and polyimides are top of the line. PEEK is hard to extrude, and it's not as flexible. So a lot of catheters are made with flexible materials. You like that ability to have enough stiffness and torqueability, but also to bend around edges and not kink. So you'll see some of the softer nylons, 12, 11, but you're starting to get into the polyurethanes and the polyether block amides, which go all the way down to about a 75A, 25D durometer. So you like to have the ductility of the soft, but you also need the rigidity and the torqueability of one of these rigids. Well, those are competing ideas. So what are some of the ways of getting around it? Well, you could reinforce the polymer, just as, injection molding applications, they load it up with carbon fiber or glass fiber. Very difficult to do that in extrusion because the wall thickness is so thin, the fibers stick out, you just wouldn't be able to extrude it. So we've gone to smaller particles and really done a lot of work with nanotechnology and nano clays. So these are small, naturally occurring clay ingredients that have a lot of surface area, high aspect ratio. So the thickness of the platelets of the clay are in the nanometer range, and the length and width of the plate are just in the submicron. But usually that means you're still with an aspect ratio of hundreds to maybe even thousands, which gives really good reinforcing capability. There's a host of advantages of the nanoclay composites, but the one we're most interested in is rigidity. So if you can look at what adding 3, 5, 7% clay to some of these polymers can do, it could increase your flex modulus 10, 20, 50% without really eliminating all the elongation that you come to like, and also the kink resistance. So higher is not better. A lot of customers say, well, we want 20% clay, just load it up. That is, the clay takes up a lot of room, especially if you exfoliate it and disperse it throughout the polymer. It takes up a lot of room in the polymer, so you really don't need any more than 9%. The properties actually start falling off. I'm talking about the elongation starts falling off. Some of the tensile strength starts falling off. You start getting a little bit of brittleness once you get into the very high loadings. But you can maintain most of those great properties of the polymer by staying at a reasonable level. Infection control. Again, I said with COVID, it's on everybody's mind. These are, the statistics. I don't know how many people in the hospitals come out with some kind of acquired infection, but it's a high rate, especially as you get to the pediatric, where some of the infants, they don't have a good immune system, and if you have anybody with a compromised immune system, anybody that is doing chemotherapy or diabetes or whatever, their system is compromised, you're going to be more susceptible to an infection. And there's ways to reduce the infection. Certainly having a faster procedure with a catheter where your tube is in and out of the body within minutes or hours is going to be better. But if you have a catheter, like an IV catheter that's going to be in for days, if not weeks, polymers, biofilm tends to like to build up on plastics. It's a real comfortable surface. So we have to do something to interrupt that. And one of the technologies that is really tried and true and has been around for centuries is silver. And it's not just putting in some silver metal particles. It has to be the ion. So the ion is what really gives the polymer, because it has to come to the surface of the polymer, and that's what's going to give it the antimicrobial behavior. The partner that we work with is Aegeon, and they have a zeolite based, and we've been working with them for quite a while. They have many different types depending on the application. So we need to know what the application is, the duration of it inside the body. And we have formulations. Again, everything's customized, but we have master batch where We would recommend that if you're doing the development work, because you could buy a master batch and kind of mix and match your own compounds to see just the exact level that you need. And then we'll move into a pre-compounded custom version of it. And I think we're kind of wrapping things up here. I'm going to talk a little bit about identification technologies, and I said it could be as simple as coloring the polymer. But as we know, once we get into medical, colors are not so easy, because you have to make sure that these pigments are approved for the application, approved for the polymer. We're concerned about the extraction of the pigment, or some pigment or something that's in the pigment that comes out of the polymer. So we're very concerned with that. We'll make color concentrates. Again, great for high volume applications. Catheters are not high volume applications, so usually it's a pre-colored compound. The list of pigments suitable is not in the hundreds. They're probably in the dozens of pigments. So you could get a wide range of colors, but you cannot get every color. And this shows you some of the colors that you can get, and certainly when you put in a radiopaque filler, it changes the game a little bit. But we have color matchers, and we work on these things every single day. We could mix and match most colors, and again, following all of the regulatory compliance, the 21 CFR 73 compliant pigments. And again, you don't need to use implantable or pigments that are certified for every application. There are a number of pigments that have been used in medical, and they have been proven safe. So in certain applications, you can use those pigments. Gives you a wider palette of colors, and there's there's a much lower cost. A couple of other things that are becoming more common today: laser marking. There are additives we can put in the polymer to allow for laser marking. What this does is a little bit more precise marking, as opposed to pad printing and the techniques for printing on catheters today. And we're looking at non-toxic, solvent-free ingredients that are going in. That's a technology. Again, it's not an exact science right now, but if you're getting into laser marking, we have a whole host of formulations, and we do a lot of development and validation of not only the formulation, but working with the laser manufacturer to dial in the amount of power that you need to get the right marking. And then the other thing is, which is becoming more of an issue today, is anti-counterfeit. So there are a host of technologies and ingredients you can put in the polymer to give it its own thumbprint, if you will, so that you can identify what product is yours versus maybe something that is a generic or an imposter. So wrapping it up, just want to talk about a couple of other things, because you guys are probably manufacturing, you're extruding, and it's not how great the polymer is, it's can you extrude it, and can I make my product? So some of the things that we'll do just to take a off-the-shelf polymer and make it a little bit better is melt filtering. And melt filtering could clean up the polymer a little bit, reduce the gels, get out some of the impurities, but it also homogenizes. So if you could afford it, because melt filtering always adds to the cost because it's another process, it can improve the quality and reduce the specification window of the polymer. So we can kind of dial in some of the properties of the raw polymer by going through a blending and melt purification process before it gets to your extruder. Our extruders range from I think 12 millimeters to 60 millimeters. So we could do the melt filtering on a larger twin screw extruder with a lot of torque. And some of these polymers require a lot of torque to melt and push through the extruder. We can homogenize that, kind of optimize the melt flow so that when it gets onto your smaller extruder, which might be 8, 12, 14 millimeter extruder, you could actually extrude it. We can also adjust the pellet size. We can make very tiny pellets, even micro pellets, if you're going on a very small extruder. Stabilization. Most of the formulations have some kind of heat and light stabilizer, some kind of process aid. Again, we can make all the compounds without it, but these are ingredients that have been tried and true. Many of them we've already had tested for USP Class 6, so they work extremely well, and they give you a little bit more stability when not only you're doing the extrusion of the tube, but also if you have a reflow process where you have to remelt the catheter tube when you're doing the assembly, or if you're doing some heat bonding. If you have a heat stabilizer in there, it could be just the thing that gets you over the hump. Conductivity. We do see some special applications for thermal and electrical conductivity, static dissipation. Not your everyday catheter, but there are some special applications. We do have a full range of development services that we support all the customers, and we have several labs, but we have labs even that the customers come in and use the equipment. We'll do proof of concept, scale up, production, and we have a full testing lab, and we have analytical testing lab, so we can do all the viscosities, melt index, FTIR. We have GPC, high performance calorimetry, and so forth. So thanks for hanging in here. Just summarizing the application. Very important that if we're starting a new project, we're sitting down with the engineers and everybody involved, trying to understand as many of the nuances as possible so that we can select the right base resin, and then what are the performance enhancements that we need? Is it visibility, mechanical properties, and identification? We can usually custom tune the polymer to whatever, but certainly we have to understand and we need to be able to make the compound so it's extrudable and you could do all of your secondary operations so that you could build a catheter. And if we can do that, and we can do this with the right regulatory compliance so that we know once we get it in production, validated, things won't change for a while, because it's always, and we get a lot of change notification, but we want to do our homework ahead of time so that we're working with ingredients and polymers that we know are going to be around for a while. So that's it. That's how we work with customers, and thank you.